Another important theme in 2018, AI. Please welcome Conrad Feldman of Quantcast. Conrad.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I think it's always good to challenge the status quo. We should all get in the habit of doing it at least occasionally. But I think there's a number of reasons why right now we really have to look at the conventional wisdom that exists in our industry and ask whether there are better ways. John spoke about Quantcast growing. I remember the early days of these conferences, and wow, 750 people here now. 10 years later, it's really remarkable. And it's a sign of how our industry has grown, the importance of data and technology in the marketing ecosystem. Certainly, there's a lot of talk about it. We've seen that over many years now, increasing talk about the importance of data and technology. But we also see it in the numbers. A recent eMarketer report estimated that $20 billion was spent last year on audience data solutions, about half of that on third-party data, about half of it on data activation. That's in 1 year. So if we go back over the last decade, it's reasonable to think that something like $100 billion has been spent applying data and technology to the marketing ecosystem. That's an enormous amount of expenditure that should have delivered fantastic results. But if you're a brand, you look at your technology, you look at your data, it's been growing exponentially. Why hasn't your brand? Bob from the ANA was here speaking yesterday, and last year he talked about the growth crisis for big brands. He mentioned how over half of Fortune 500 brands' revenue declined, even though they're spending more than ever on advertising. And today I'd like to explore some of the reasons behind that, some of the things that we need to question to help brands and help the industry be on the right track. So the first one I'm going to bring up, and I'm being deliberately provocative here, but most of the data used to build and project models is garbage. Now, that's a broad generalization, and obviously the value of data is very much dependent upon the way in which it is used. But one of the primary ways in which we use data and models is to understand the world around us and to predict the future. So to build models that can classify and predict. And whilst a lot of third-party data may provide useful insight into small groups, as the foundation for building models that are going to build understanding, classification, and predictions about the future for everyone, those data sets are deeply flawed. Models are built on a foundation of data. And just like with our regular architecture, if you don't have a solid foundation, it's very difficult to build a model architecture on top of it. And fundamentally, the nature of third-party data in terms of its accuracy, in particular in terms of its provenance, really knowing what's in it, makes it very, very difficult to build subsequent models that you can rely on. I think another fundamental challenge has been the way in which we've applied technology. This is not to say we haven't done a good job of applying technology, but we've applied it in a very specific way. A lot of the investment that's been in technology in our industry has been to make things more efficient. And that's good and it's necessary, but it's different from being more effective. And let me give you an example. For years, the most commonly used software in the marketing ecosystem, think about media, think about the world of advertising, media buying. Who knows what the most commonly used software was? Excel, right? Excel. You get everything, you look at your media plan, you see what's working, you make some optimizations. And then along came this thing called programmatic. We have this divorcing of media and audiences. Essentially, media and audiences have become atomized. That creates a huge amount of complexity, certainly more choices than there are rows that will fit in Excel. So we developed software that let people apply the same sort of logic. We call this software DSPs, demand-side platforms. And demand-side platforms are tools that essentially let people pull levers. And there's more and more levers. As the complexity of the environment increased, as we had new requirements around things like viewability, there were more levers. And there are more and more people pulling these levers. If you've in-house this, you might have dozens of people. If you're a big agency group, you've got hundreds and hundreds of people pulling levers. And this is sort of a classic example of conventional wisdom. And without getting too meta, the conventional wisdom here is that conventional wisdom, what's in here, human hypothesis, is the best way of doing it. Because that's the way we've always done it. Advertising has always been based on the application of human hypothesis. We come up with a persona, our best estimate. We come up with the ways we think we're going to set up a plan and optimize it. And it's not that people are bad at doing it, but there's a much greater opportunity when we think about the application of technology to supplement, or in some cases replace, this conventional wisdom, human hypothesis. So I started my career 25 years ago as a researcher in AI, specializing in a field called neural networks. And since then, I've created AI systems and businesses using AI systems that have automated many of the tasks that were traditionally done by expert practitioners in a field. The very first production system I worked on was an AI system for financial trading. So this was a system that wasn't just executing the trade, but was determining itself based on market signals when to trade. That was a really big deal 25 years ago. Today, the vast majority of financial transactions around the world aren't just executed by computers. The actual decision about what to trade and when to trade is made by a computer system. There's no reason that that shouldn't be the case in the advertising field. It's an incredibly complex area. We sort of marvel. We marvel at the advances in computing. 20 years ago, we marveled when a computer could beat a human at chess. A supercomputer back then, the equivalent of your smartphone today. And here we are, trying to beat computers at advertising. Advertising is way more complex than chess. The third thing, there's a lot of other areas I could highlight, but the third one I want to touch on is the most insidious, because it is the one by which we judge everything else. As an industry, we're very happy valuing what we can measure. That doesn't mean we're measuring what is of value. For years, our industry has talked about the problem of the click-through rate. If I hear anyone else talking about how great their models are because they improve click-through rate, unless it's a model to detect fraud, I'm not very interested. It's a great metric for search. It's a terrible metric generally outside of that because it doesn't relate to consumer experience. And advertising is about creating good, relevant consumer experiences. So the challenges of that have been well talked about. I'm going to touch on another one today, which is how we attribute advertising goals and the advertising that went before that to success. And the real problem is we've sort of started to divorce the metrics that we measure day in, day out on campaigns from actual business outcomes. So here we have a McDonald's. This is a McDonald's in Brazil. Now, I'm barely coherent in English, so I had to rely on someone else for the Portuguese. But the sign on the left says, order here. The sign on the right says, pay here. And right in the middle is an ad. There's an ad there for a Big Mac. Now, as an industry, what we are doing today, representing tens of billions of dollars, is assigning all of the credit for the sale that takes place in that right-hand counter for the ad that occurred just before it. That is happening there. You laugh. It's sad. It's sad, but it's true. And I have to tell you, whilst there's a lot of promise in things like multi-touch attribution, the way it is being used today, it is making exactly the same mistake. In some ways, it could be more dangerous because it's a more sophisticated model, but people haven't recognized the limitations of applying those models to variables that aren't independent. It is essentially guaranteed that once you visit a particular site, if you haven't yet made a purchase, you're going to see more ads. And that has caused a lot of confusion. Essentially, as an industry, we have become obsessed with correlation. We need to think about causation. And the reason this is so important is, ultimately, any other thing we might look at, any advance in data, in technology, in creative or otherwise, tends to be assessed based upon the impact that it has on the specific metrics we're using day in, day out to evaluate where it's applied, those campaigns. And at those metrics, this particular metric, last touch, it doesn't matter what data you've been using. It doesn't matter what technology you've been doing. The way you get more credit for that is you show more ads to people that have already visited a site, and it will appear that you've got credit. You had the credit for the campaign. That doesn't mean you've caused it. And that is one of the reasons why we've invested so much money and we think we're doing a good job, yet in fact we haven't really made rational assessments about the incrementality that different solutions provide. And if you think that's a problem today, just wait. So a lot of talk about AI. Having spent 25 years in the field, finally my mother's like, oh, that's that thing you were doing. And AI is not new. AI has been around for a long time. The term was coined in the 50s, but because of advances in hardware speed, because of advances in the amount of data that's available, it's meant we've been able to make significant advances in software. And we're seeing some real breakthroughs in AI. We just heard from Henry talking about that it's a little overhyped. That is true. AI is overhyped, but it's overhyped and it will be completely transformative. It will be completely transformative to every company, to every industry, to every brand, to every customer experience. It will herald in a bigger change in our industry and every other industry than the internet. But it's not without its challenges. AI is a tool, a very sophisticated tool, and it needs to be directed in the right fashion. We can't expect technology to measure and optimize to goals that are useful for the business if we can't value them properly ourselves. The mechanism by which artificial intelligence emerges is called machine learning. Machine learning are goal-driven algorithms. They optimize the goals. And if we think an entire industry with smart people with good intentions has been able to optimize towards the wrong goals, you just wait until we let AI loose on it. AI will happily optimize, ruthlessly optimize towards the wrong goal. So it's even more important when we start to use these technologies. They offer phenomenal potential for us, but we have to use them wisely. So just a few thoughts on what the future looks like. First up, machines are going to automate tactical execution. What I mean by tactical execution, the work that is done today with people pulling levers, checking in on campaigns, maybe on a daily basis, maybe hourly, making some adjustments, setting up groups, deciding which subsets of data to optimize, computers are going to optimize all of that. And that creates an opportunity. It creates an opportunity for investment in other areas, for things that people are better at doing than computers. The ability to assimilate information from different domains and different fields, to be creative. We are a long way. We're very good with AI today at solving narrow tasks. But things that require thinking across several domains, making those sorts of connections, we're much better at doing. This is going to free up people to focus on strategy and creative. It does mean a change. There won't be those teams of people pulling levers. They'll be doing other things. Actually, given the change that the advertising agencies need to go through, that represents a very significant opportunity for cost saving and focusing more on the things that ultimately create value for their customers. First-party data will reign supreme for predictive models. This is not to say there isn't an important role for third-party data. Third-party data is a useful way of generating insights, is a useful way of looking at outcomes. But in terms of the foundation for how we make predictions about people that we don't currently know or what people might do next, the foundation for that has to be first-party. There's been a lot of talk about the duopoly. And depending on whose numbers you believe, the duopoly account for something between 70% and 110% of all of the growth in digital advertising. But obviously, they don't represent 70% to 100% of everything that takes place in terms of digital media and consumer attention. One of the reasons they've built great services, one of the reasons they've been able to build those great services is the foundation on which they build their systems and models is consistent and stable. They understand the inherent provenance and the freshness of all of that data, and it is a consistent foundation for growth. You're going to need to be working with your own first-party data and with partners that have large-scaled first-party data to be successful in terms of generating and using these predictive models. Incrementality is the ultimate metric. Measuring how much was created, how much value was created that wouldn't have existed if I hadn't done this. Now, some very sophisticated online marketers today use just incrementality. They don't have to worry about fraud. They don't have to worry about viewability because bots aren't buying their products and non-viewable ads can't influence consumers. So incrementality as a metric filters it out. Now, the reality is to run incrementality all the time for most advertisers is out of reach. It's expensive and it's error-prone running A/B tests. But it is really, really important that the proxies that we use are calibrated regularly based on incrementality. Then we'll actually get back to focusing on investing in things that actually generate growth. And the last point I want to make is it's easy to sort of look at the challenges of data and technology. But the reasons for these challenges aren't just about data and technology. They're about some of the fundamental strategies that are employed. And I believe in the future, brands will start growing again, and they'll grow the right way. And brands themselves have to question some of the tactics and the strategy. A lot of the focus of what we've been able to do has become very short-term focus. We just heard about the importance of planning for the long term as it relates to technology businesses. The same is true for any brand. You know, it's been 10 years since there was some great research done called The Long and the Short of It, Les Binet and Peter Field. And they looked at a huge number of companies and their advertising strategies and demonstrated conclusively that the companies that invested both in short-term performance advertising and simultaneously in long-term brand building over periods of years grew their revenue faster, captured more market share, had less price sensitivity, and generated greater profits than those that only focused on the short term. Even some of the things that are held really dear to the heart of some marketers, when you actually dig in and start doing the research, may not be true. A classic thing I hear is we want to grow our brand, we're going to go after the heavy consumers, the heavy shoppers in that area. Has anyone here read Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow? A few hands. There's actually 2 volumes of it. You can just read the first one. It's an excellent read. And it's got a lot of things in there that would be counterintuitive to a lot of brand marketers. But if you think about the statistics that sit behind it, they make a lot of sense. Heavy shoppers are heavy shoppers in a given period. There's a thing in statistics called regression to the mean. Actually, what this research shows is rather than going after the heavy shoppers, the way to grow your brand is to go after the light shoppers and also to grow the category. So I think there's a need to question the conventional wisdom from everyone in the ecosystem. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and I don't want to sort of gloss over the advances and the benefits that we've been able to create over the last decade. But the benefits that we can create, the return that we can create for this entire industry, the entire ecosystem, is very significant. But to get there, we've really got to question conventional wisdom, and really it's time to question everything. Thank you.